I was 7 months pregnant, standing in my mother-in-law's kitchen at 5 a.m., trying to prep carnitas for 20 people when I felt the baby kick so hard it took my breath away. My swollen feet were screaming, my back was on fire, and I'd already been cooking for 6 hours straight. That's when Patricia walked in, looked at the mountain of food I'd prepared, and said, "The mole doesn't look right." My grandmother would be rolling in her grave. Maybe you should have asked someone who actually knows how to cook Mexican food. That was the moment I pulled out my phone and hired Chef Isabella Rodriguez for $1,200. And yes, I sent my in-laws the bill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez, though everyone calls me Jess. I'm 26 years old, 7 months pregnant with my first baby, and I live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe, Arizona with my husband, David. On paper, I work as a marketing coordinator for Valley Health Initiative, a nonprofit that focuses on community wellness programs. In reality, I spend my days juggling social media campaigns, coordinating health fairs, managing donor relationships, and somehow making every project run smoothly, despite constant budget cuts and impossible deadlines. What makes me good at my job is the same thing that's been slowly killing me in my personal life. I'm the person who thinks 5 steps ahead, who remembers everyone's dietary restrictions, who color codes spreadsheets and sends reminder emails 3 days before deadlines. I'm the one who notices when someone's struggling and quietly redistributes the workload. I'm organized, reliable, and I have this terrible habit of seeing what needs to be done and just doing it, even when it's not technically my responsibility. When David and I got married 2 years ago, I thought I was gaining a family. His parents, Patricia and Robert Martinez, seemed warm enough during our engagement. Patricia would hug me and call me mija, and Robert would pat David on the back and say things like, "You found yourself a good one, son." They had this beautiful 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale with a spacious kitchen and a backyard perfect for entertaining. David grew up with big family gatherings every Sunday, cousins running around, multiple generations sharing meals and stories. It sounded wonderful. Coming from a small family myself, I was excited to be part of something bigger. My own mother had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer, and my father had retreated into himself, barely speaking to anyone. My sister Amanda lived in Denver with her own family. David's loud, chaotic, loving Mexican-American clan felt like exactly what I needed. The problems started small, the way they always do. The first Sunday dinner I attended as David's wife, Patricia asked if I could bring a side dish. I made my mother's famous cornbread, a recipe that had been in our family for generations. When I set it on the table, Patricia smiled tightly and said, "Oh, how interesting. We usually stick to traditional sides, but this is creative." Nobody touched it. I watched 20 people eat around my cornbread like it was contaminated. David squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Don't take it personally. Mom's just particular about food." But it didn't feel particular. It felt like a test I'd failed before I even knew I was taking it. The requests started gradually. "Jess, since you're so good at organizing things at work, could you help coordinate Angela's baby shower?" Then it was, "Jess, you have such a good eye for decorations. Could you handle the centerpieces for Mike's graduation party?" Each time I said yes, because that's what family does, right? You help each other out. But the help only flowed one way. When David and I needed furniture for our apartment, his family was mysteriously busy. When I had a pregnancy scare at 4 months and needed someone to drive me to the doctor because David was stuck at parent-teacher conferences, Patricia told me she had book club and couldn't cancel. When we asked for help painting the nursery, everyone suddenly had prior commitments. The pattern became clear. I was expected to give, but never to receive. I was the daughter-in-law, which meant I was supposed to prove my worth through service. And because I was good at organizing, because I could handle logistics and didn't complain, because I said yes when everyone else said no, I became their go-to person for everything that required actual work. 3 weeks ago, Patricia called me at work. I was in the middle of coordinating a flu shot clinic for 300 people, trying to juggle vendor confirmations and volunteer schedules when my phone rang. Jess, mija, I need to talk to you about Robert's birthday. Her voice had that tone, the one that sounded sweet but carried an undertone of expectation. We want to do something really special for his 61st. The whole family, about 20 people. I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder while typing an email to the pharmacy coordinator. That sounds nice, Patricia. What were you thinking? Well, you know how much Robert loves traditional Mexican food, and you've been learning to cook our family recipes. This was news to me. I'd made exactly 3 Mexican dishes in my entire life, and 2 of them had been disasters. I was thinking you could handle the cooking. Make it really authentic, Show Robert how much you've embraced our culture. I stopped typing. You want me to cook for 20 people? It would mean so much to him, Jess. And to me. You know how important family traditions are to us. This could be your chance to really show everyone that you belong. There it was. The implication that I didn't quite belong yet, that I needed to earn my place through some kind of culinary trial by fire. I thought about my swollen ankles, my constant exhaustion, the way my doctor had warned me about overexertion in my 3rd trimester. Patricia, I'm 7 months pregnant. That's a lot of cooking for one person. Oh, but you're so organized. And you're not working full-time right now, right? Wrong. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was working modified hours, but I was still managing 3 major projects and trying to train my temporary replacement. Besides, the other girls will help. By other girls, she meant Lisa and Angela, Mike and Angela's wives, who both worked full-time and had young children. When is the party? October 28th, Saturday afternoon. We'll do it at our house, of course. Oh, and Jess? Make sure you accommodate everyone's dietary needs. Frank is diabetic, Maggie needs low sodium, and little Emma won't eat anything. With visible spices. I agreed, because I didn't know how to say no. Because saying no felt like admitting I wasn't good enough, strong enough, committed enough to this family I'd married into. Because David had grown up with big family celebrations, and I wanted to give him that. Because I was 7 months pregnant and hormonal and desperate to prove I could be the daughter-in-law they wanted. The menu Patricia had in mind wasn't just ambitious, it was insane. Carnitas that needed to slow cook for 8 hours. Chicken mole with a sauce that required 17 ingredients and 3 different types of chilies. Fresh salsas made from scratch. Homemade tortillas. Mexican rice that Patricia insisted had to be made with her mother's secret technique. Refried beans from dried pintos, not canned. Tres leches cake that required separating a dozen eggs and whipping cream by hand because the texture is never right with a mixer. Each day leading up to the party, Patricia would call with additions. Oh, and Jess, could you make some deviled eggs? Robert's sister Margaret loves them. Then it was horchata from scratch, then a lote for the kids who might not like the main dishes, then a completely separate vegetarian option because Angela's husband Carlos had recently decided to try plant-based eating. I spent my evenings after work researching recipes, watching YouTube videos, practicing techniques I'd never used before. I went to 3 different grocery stores to find the right type of chilies for the mole. I ordered masa harina online because none of the regular supermarkets carried it. I borrowed large pots from neighbors because my small apartment kitchen didn't have equipment for cooking for 20 people. David tried to help, but he worked late most nights grading papers and preparing lesson plans. When he was home, he'd see me surrounded by recipe printouts and grocery lists and would say, "Babe, this seems like a lot. "Are you sure you want to do all this?" But when I suggested maybe we could ask his family to help or simplify the menu, he'd get uncomfortable. "Mom's just excited to have you cooking traditional food. It's really important to her." 2 days. Before the party, I was at the grocery store for the 4th time that week, my cart loaded with ingredients, when I ran into my friend Rachel from college. She took one look at me, 7 months pregnant and clearly exhausted, pushing a cart full of food, and said, "Jess, what the hell are you doing?" I explained about the party, about Robert's birthday, about wanting to make a good impression. Rachel stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're going to cook for 20 people, by yourself, while 7 months pregnant?" She shook her head. "Jess, when my sister-in-law pulled this kind of thing on me, you know what I did? I hired a caterer and told everyone she was sick." I laughed, but it was hollow. "I can't hire a caterer. Patricia specifically asked me to cook. It's supposed to show that I've embraced their culture." "Bullshit," Rachel said bluntly. "It's supposed to show that you'll break your back to please them. There's a difference between embracing culture and being exploited." That night, I lay in bed next to David, my mind racing. The baby was particularly active, rolling and kicking like they could sense my stress. I thought about my mother, who had taught me that love was shown through service, through making other people's lives easier. But she'd also taught me that respect was earned both ways, that relationships required reciprocity. I thought about the baby I was carrying, about the kind of mother I wanted to be. Did I want to raise a child who saw me constantly exhausting myself to please others? Or did I want to model boundaries, self-respect, the understanding that love doesn't require martyrdom? The next morning, Friday, I called in sick to work. I told my supervisor I was having pregnancy complications, which wasn't entirely untrue. The stress was giving me headaches, and my blood pressure had been elevated at my last appointment. I drove to Patricia's house in Scottsdale to start the prep work. The Martinez house was beautiful, with its terracotta tiles and desert landscaping. But the kitchen, despite being large and well-appointed, wasn't designed for cooking a feast for 20 people. The refrigerator was already full of Patricia's regular groceries. The counter space was limited once I started laying out ingredients. The single oven meant I'd have to cook everything in careful sequence. I started at 6 in the morning with the carnitas, seasoning 4 pounds of pork shoulder and getting it into Patricia's slow cooker. Then I began the mole, toasting chilies and grinding spices, my pregnant belly bumping against the counter every time I reached for something. The October heat in Arizona was still brutal, and the kitchen was sweltering even with the air conditioning running. By 10 a.m., I was covered in sweat. My feet were throbbing, and I'd only completed 2 dishes. I still had the rice, the beans, the salsas, the tortillas, the tres leches cake, the deviled eggs, the horchata, and the elote ahead of me. The baby was kicking constantly, probably protesting the heat and my stress hormones. Patricia wandered into the kitchen around 11, fresh from her morning yoga class, wearing pristine white linen pants and a flowing top. She surveyed my work with a critical eye, lifting the lid on the mole pot and frowning. "The color doesn't look right," she said, stirring the sauce with a wooden spoon. "My grandmother's mole was darker, more chocolate notes. Are you sure you followed the recipe correctly?" I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. "I followed the recipe you gave me exactly. I toasted the chilies until they were fragrant, ground them with the chocolate and spices." She tasted it and made a face. "It's too bitter, and the consistency is off. My grandmother would be rolling in her grave seeing mole that looks like this. Maybe you should have asked someone who actually knows how to cook Mexican food." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been working for 5 hours, my body aching, trying to perfect recipes I'd never made before, and she was criticizing my attempt to honor her family's traditions. I felt tears prick my eyes, partly from exhaustion and partly from the casual cruelty of her words. I can try to fix it, I said quietly. Maybe add more chocolate or… No, it's fine, Patricia said with a wave of her hand, the kind of dismissive gesture that meant it wasn't fine at all. People will eat it. Robert won't want to hurt your feelings by saying anything. She left me standing there in her kitchen, surrounded by half-finished dishes, feeling like a complete failure. This wasn't about embracing culture or showing love through cooking. This was about proving my worth to people who had already decided I'd never measure up. I looked at the clock. It was 11:30 in the morning. The party started at 3. I still had hours of cooking ahead of me, and my body was already giving out. The baby was kicking so hard it was making me nauseous. My back was spasming from standing and stirring. My feet had swollen so much my shoes were cutting off circulation. That's when I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before in my life. I Googled Catering Phoenix, Arizona Mexican food. The first result was Saber Autentico Catering, run by Chef Isabella Rodriguez. Her website showed beautiful photos of authentic Mexican dishes, testimonials from satisfied customers, and a phone number for last-minute orders. My hands were shaking as I dialed. When Chef Isabella answered, her voice was warm and professional. Sabor Autentico, this is Isabella. Hi, I said, my voice barely steady. I know this is incredibly last minute, but I need help. I'm supposed to be cooking for 20 people today, and I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm drowning. There was a pause. Then Isabella's voice softened. Oh, mija. Tell me what you need. I explained the situation, the menu, the timeline, my complete panic. Isabella listened without judgment, asking practical questions about dietary restrictions, preferred spice levels, and serving time. I can have everything ready by 2:30, she said. Carnitas, chicken mole, Mexican rice, refried beans, fresh salsas, handmade tortillas, tres leches cake, the works. My signature mole recipe has been in my family for 4 generations, and I guarantee it will be perfect. The total cost is $1,200, and that includes setup and serving. Platters. $1,200. It was a lot of money. Money David and I were saving for the baby, for a house down payment, for our future. But as I stood in that sweltering kitchen, my body exhausted and my spirit broken, it felt like the best investment I'd ever made. Yes, I said without hesitation. Please, thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Isabella laughed. Wait until you taste the food. And mija, stop trying to prove yourself to people who don't deserve it. You're growing a human being. That's work enough. After I hung up, I turned off all the burners, covered the half-finished dishes, and walked out of Patricia's kitchen. I drove home. To my apartment, ran a cool bath, and soaked my swollen feet while the baby finally settled down, seeming to sense that Mama had finally stopped panicking. At 2 o'clock, I drove back to the Martinez house. Chef Isabella was already there with her assistant, unloading professional-grade warming trays and serving platters from a catering van. She was a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes and confident hands wearing a chef's coat embroidered with her restaurant logo. You must be Jess, she said, giving me a gentle hug. Go sit down, mija. We've got this. I watched in amazement as Isabella and her team transformed Patricia's kitchen into a professional operation. The mole was rich and complex, with layers of flavor I couldn't have achieved in 100 attempts. The carnitas were perfectly seasoned and falling apart tender. The rice was fluffy and aromatic. The tres leches cake looked like something from a high-end bakery. When Patricia came into the kitchen at 2:45, expecting to find me frantically finishing last-minute preparations, she stopped short at the sight of professional caterers arranging her dining room buffet. What's going on? She asked, looking confused and slightly alarmed. I hired Chef Isabella to handle the food, I said calmly, sitting at her kitchen table with my feet elevated. Everything's ready for the party. Patricia's face went through several expressions: confusion, shock, and then anger. You hired a caterer? But you were supposed to cook. This was supposed to be your contribution to the family. My contribution, I said steadily, was recognizing that I needed help and making sure Robert has a beautiful birthday celebration with amazing food. Which he will. Before Patricia could respond, guests started arriving. Robert walked into the dining room and stopped at the buffet, his eyes widening at the spread. He tried the mole first, closing his eyes as he tasted it. "Patricia," he called out, "this mole is incredible. It tastes exactly like my mother's recipe. How did you manage to get it so perfect?" Patricia looked at me, trapped between taking credit she didn't deserve and admitting I'd hired help. "Well," she said stiffly, "Jess arranged everything." The party was a complete success. Everyone raved about the food. Uncle Frank said it was the best carnitas he'd had since his grandmother passed away. Aunt Maggie complimented the tres leches cake. Even the kids ate everything without complaint. I sat at the table, my feet finally comfortable in flat sandals, watching David's family enjoy their meal. Chef Isabella had quietly packed up and left, but not before slipping me her card and saying, "Call me anytime you need backup, mija." Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. As the evening wound down and people started saying their goodbyes, Patricia cornered me in the kitchen. "I can't believe you hired a caterer," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me? What will people think?" "They'll think Robert had a wonderful birthday with delicious food," I replied. "Isn't that what matters?" "You were supposed to prove yourself," Patricia snapped. "This was your chance to show that you belong in this family, that you can handle our traditions." "By exhausting myself and risking my pregnancy?" I asked. "By making food I don't know how to make and setting myself up to fail?" "Patricia, I belong in this family because I married your son and I'm carrying your grandchild, not because I can make mole from scratch." Monday morning, I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I created an invoice on my laptop, itemizing every expense from Robert's party. $400 for Chef Isabella's labor, $600 for ingredients and food costs, $150 for additional serving staff, $50 for equipment rental. Total, $1,200. I printed it out on professional letterhead and mailed it to Patricia and Robert with a note. "Thank you for allowing me to coordinate Robert's birthday celebration. Please find attached the invoice for catering services. The party was beautiful, and I'm so glad everyone enjoyed themselves." 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Patricia, and she was furious. "Jess, what is this bill? You can't seriously expect us to pay for a caterer we didn't hire." "You asked me to handle Robert's birthday dinner," I said calmly. "I handled it. This is what it cost." "But you were supposed to cook. That was your contribution." "My contribution was ensuring your husband had a memorable birthday with amazing food that everyone enjoyed. Mission accomplished. This is ridiculous. We're not paying this." "That's your choice," I said. "But just so we're clear going forward, any future event coordination I handle will be billed at professional rates. My event planning services start at $50 per hour, not including expenses." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You've changed," Patricia finally said, her voice cold. "This isn't the Jess we welcomed into our family." "You're right," I agreed. "The Jess you welcomed into your family was someone who said yes to everything, who prioritized everyone else's comfort over her own well-being, who was willing to exhaust herself trying to earn approval that was never actually available. That Jess was hurting herself and her baby trying to be perfect for people who were determined to find fault, no matter what she did. We never asked you to be perfect. You asked me to cook for 20 people while 7 months pregnant. You criticized my attempt to learn your family recipes. You turned what should have been a celebration into a test I was designed to fail. So yes, I've changed. I've learned to ask for help when I need it, to set boundaries that protect my health and my family's well-being, and to value myself enough to not accept treatment that diminishes my worth. Patricia hung up without another word. That afternoon, David came home from school looking troubled. "Mom called me," he said, sitting down heavily on our couch. "She's really upset about the catering bill." I looked at my husband, this man I loved who had grown up in a family where women's labor was invisible and expected. "Are you upset about it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm trying to understand. Mom says you embarrassed her by hiring a caterer without telling anyone." "David," I said gently, "I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and your mother criticized my cooking while I was killing myself, trying to make your father's birthday special. I made a choice to prioritize my health and our baby's well-being over your mother's need to see me struggle." "But $1,200, Jess, that's a lot of money." "It's exactly what professional catering costs," I replied. "If your family wants restaurant-quality food for 20 people, they can pay restaurant prices. If they want home cooking, they can cook at home themselves or ask for help in a reasonable way that doesn't involve one pregnant woman doing all the work." David ran his hands through his hair. "She says you're not the same person she welcomed into the family." "Good," I said firmly. "The person she welcomed into your family was willing to sacrifice her health and happiness to earn approval from people who were never planning to give it. The person I am now values herself enough to ask for help when she needs it, and to refuse treatment that's harmful to her and her baby." "So, what happens now?" David asked. "Now, your family learns that I'm not their unpaid event coordinator. If they want my help with future celebrations, they can ask nicely, offer to share the work, and respect my limitations. Or they can plan their own parties. And if they don't pay the catering bill," I shrugged, "then they don't pay it. But they also don't get to expect me to handle their events for free in the future." 3 weeks later, a check arrived in the mail. $600, exactly half the catering bill, with a note from Robert. "Thank you for making my birthday special. The food was incredible." It wasn't the full amount, but it was acknowledgement. More importantly, it was proof that boundaries work. When you stop accepting unacceptable treatment, people either learn to treat you better or they reveal who they really are. Christmas came 2 months later. Patricia called in early December, her voice carefully neutral. "We're planning Christmas. Dinner. Would you like to bring a side dish?" "I'd be happy to bring something," I said. "What were you thinking?" "Maybe some dinner rolls? Store-bought is fine." Store-bought dinner rolls. After months of expecting me to single-handedly cater elaborate celebrations, she was now asking me to pick up bread from the grocery store bakery. The message was clear. I was no longer expected to prove my worth through culinary heroics. "That sounds perfect," I said. Our daughter was born in January, healthy and beautiful, with David's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. When Patricia came to meet her granddaughter for the first time, she brought flowers and a casserole. "I thought you might be too tired to cook," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. "Thank you," I said, accepting both the gesture and the underlying apology. "That's really thoughtful." We never talked directly about the catering bill or the birthday party or the shift in our relationship. But something had fundamentally changed. Patricia stopped making unreasonable requests. She started asking instead of assuming. She began to treat me like a person with my own limitations and needs, instead of an endless resource for unpaid labor. 6 months later, when Mike's wife Lisa was planning their 10th anniversary party, Patricia suggested they hire a caterer. "It's worth the expense," she said. "Professional food makes such a difference, and it's not fair to expect one person to handle everything." I smiled, bouncing my daughter on my lap while watching my sister-in-law's face register surprise at this sudden reasonableness from her mother-in-law. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is teaching them how to treat you. Sometimes love requires boundaries. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to exhaust yourself trying to earn approval from people who mistake your strength for their convenience. The chef's card is still tucked into my wallet, a reminder that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That my worth isn't measured by how much I can endure, but by how well I can advocate for myself and the people I love. And every time I look at my daughter, I'm grateful she'll grow up seeing a mother who values herself enough to say no, who understands that love doesn't require martyrdom, and who knows the difference between serving others and serving herself up as a sacrifice. Because the most important lesson I can teach her isn't how to please everyone around her. It's how to respect herself enough to demand the same from others. The thing about being the reliable one is that people start to confuse your competence with your availability. They see someone who can handle logistics, who remembers details, who follows through on commitments, and they automatically assume that person exists for their convenience. What they don't see is the spreadsheet of your own needs that never gets updated, the personal projects that get pushed aside, the quiet exhaustion that builds up when you're always the one saying yes. I learned this lesson the hard way through. A series of small moments that should have been red flags but felt like normal family dynamics at the time. The first major event I coordinated for the Martinez family was Angela's baby shower when I'd only been married to David for 6 months. Angela was having her third child, a surprise pregnancy that came when her youngest, Maya, was barely 2 years old. Patricia approached me after Sunday dinner one week in March, her voice carrying that particular tone that sounded like a request but felt like an assignment. "Jess, mija, I need to ask you a favor," she began, settling into the chair next to me while the men watched basketball and the kids ran around the backyard. "Angela is so overwhelmed with work and the other kids, and I'm just not good with all the modern party planning stuff. You're so organized at your job, and you have such creative ideas. Would you mind helping coordinate her shower?" The way she phrased it made it sound like a collaborative effort, like I'd be one of several people contributing to make Angela's day special. I imagined brainstorming sessions with the other women in the family, dividing up tasks, sharing both the work and the costs. It sounded like a wonderful way to bond with my new sisters-in-law and show that I was truly part of the family. "Of course," I said immediately. "I'd love to help. When were you thinking of having it?" "Oh, probably in about 6 weeks. Angela will be 7 months along by then, so not too close to her due date, but far enough along that we know everything's progressing well." Patricia smiled warmly. "I knew you'd say yes. You're such a blessing to this family, always willing to jump in and help." What I thought would be a group effort quickly became a solo project. When I reached out to Lisa, Mike's wife, about helping with decorations, she said she was swamped with Emma's soccer schedule and Tyler's speech therapy appointments. When I asked Angela's sister-in-law about splitting the catering costs, she mentioned that money was tight and asked if we could keep it simple. Patricia, who had initially suggested the shower, became mysteriously busy whenever I tried to discuss specific plans, always responding with, "You have such good taste, mija. I trust your judgment completely." I found myself researching baby shower themes at midnight after work, comparing prices for rental linens during my lunch breaks, and spending my weekends driving to 3 different party stores to find decorations that matched Angela's nursery colors. The guest list grew from the original Just family to include Angela's work friends, her neighbors, her college roommates, and several family friends I'd never met. What started as an intimate gathering for 15 people became a full-scale event for 45. The budget, which Patricia had initially suggested should be reasonable, maybe $200 or $300, quickly spiraled as expectations grew. Angela mentioned she was hoping for a dessert table with multiple options because her coworkers had different dietary restrictions. Patricia suggested we include traditional Mexican hot chocolate alongside the typical shower beverages. Lisa mentioned that Emma, who was 5 at the time, was excited to help with games, so we needed to plan activities that would engage both adults and children. Every addition felt reasonable in isolation. Of course, we wanted Angela to have beautiful decorations. Of course, we should accommodate dietary restrictions. Of course, we needed enough food for everyone who wanted to celebrate. But the cumulative effect was overwhelming, and somehow I'd become the person responsible for making it all happen. The shower was held at Patricia's house, in her spacious backyard with its mature desert landscaping and covered patio. I arrived at 7 in the morning to set up, carrying boxes of decorations, borrowed tables, rented linens, and enough food to feed a small army. Patricia was still in her robe when I rang the doorbell, looking surprised to see me so early. "Oh, Jess, you're here already. I was just having my coffee. Do you need help carrying things in?" But she didn't wait for an answer, disappearing back into the house while I made multiple trips from my car to the backyard, my arms full of party supplies. By the time she reappeared, dressed and ready for the day, I had most of the tables set up and was working on hanging papel picado along the patio roof. "This looks beautiful," she exclaimed, surveying my work. "You really do have an eye for this kind of thing. Angela is going to be so surprised." The shower was a complete success. Angela cried happy tears when she saw the decorations. The food was delicious and there was plenty for everyone. The games were fun and inclusive. The dessert table was Instagram-worthy. Everyone complimented the attention to detail, the thoughtful touches, the way everything flowed seamlessly from one activity to the next. What struck me most was how quickly everyone forgot who had made it all happen. As guests complimented the beautiful decorations, Patricia would smile and say, "We wanted everything to be perfect for Angela." When people praised the delicious food, she'd respond with, "Family celebrations are so important to us." The hours of planning, the late nights researching vendors, the money I'd spent on supplies that were never reimbursed, became invisible, absorbed into some collective family effort that existed more in narrative than in reality. Angela hugged me at the end of the day and thanked me for helping make everything so special. But it was the kind of thanks you give someone who contributed to a group effort, not someone who had essentially planned and executed the entire event single-handedly. Patricia took photos throughout the party, but somehow I was rarely in them, despite being the one who'd created every moment she was documenting. That should have been my first warning sign. But success has a way of breeding more expectations. Word spread through the extended family network about how beautifully Angela's shower had turned out, and suddenly I became the unofficial family event coordinator. When Mike graduated from his MBA program 2 months later, Patricia called me to ask if I could work my magic on a celebration dinner. When Robert's sister Margaret had her retirement party, I got a text asking if I could just quickly put together centerpieces for 8 tables. Each request came with the same language of appreciation and family togetherness, but the pattern was always the same. I would be presented with an event that needed coordination, praised for my skills and creativity, and then left to handle everything from concept to execution, while others took credit for the results. The costs were always shared, which meant I paid up front and spent months trying to collect reimbursements that never quite covered what I'd actually spent. The timeline was always compressed, because somehow these celebrations were only brought to my attention a few weeks before they needed to happen. My own birthday that first year was a perfect example of how this dynamic worked. Patricia called me 2 days before my 25th birthday to ask what I wanted to do to celebrate. I suggested maybe a nice dinner at a restaurant, something simple and relaxed. She said that sounded lovely and that she'd make a reservation somewhere special. The day of my birthday, I got a text asking me to confirm the reservation I had made and to let everyone know the details. When I called to clarify, Patricia sounded confused. "Oh, didn't I mention that you should pick the restaurant? You know what kind of food you like better than I do, and you're so good at finding those little hidden gems." So I spent my birthday morning researching restaurants, calling to check availability, and making a reservation for 8 people. I chose a lovely Mexican fusion place in Scottsdale that had excellent reviews and a beautiful patio. When we arrived that evening, everyone complimented Patricia on her choice of restaurant, and she graciously accepted their praise while I paid the bill for my own birthday dinner. The gift giving that night was equally telling. Patricia presented me with a beautiful necklace that she'd clearly put thought into selecting. But when I opened the card, It was signed from the entire family. And over the following weeks, I heard various family members mention their contributions to our gift for Jess. What had appeared to be a thoughtful personal gesture from my mother-in-law was actually a group purchase that she'd coordinated and taken credit for, while I had unknowingly funded my own celebration. These experiences started to accumulate in ways I didn't fully recognize at the time. I began to feel a strange sort of emptiness after family events, a hollow feeling that took me years to identify as resentment. I was contributing enormous amounts of time, energy, and money to celebrations that everyone enjoyed, but I never felt truly celebrated myself. I was essential to making these gatherings happen, but somehow peripheral to the actual experience of them. David noticed my growing exhaustion, but interpreted it differently than I did. After particularly demanding events, he'd tell me how proud he was of my efforts, how much his family appreciated everything I did for them. He saw my contributions as evidence of how well I'd integrated into his family, how much they valued and trusted me. What he didn't see was how isolated the responsibility made me feel, how the praise felt hollow when it was disconnected from any real recognition of the sacrifice involved. The requests became more frequent and more complex as my reputation as the family problem solver grew. I planned Mike's surprise 30th birthday party, coordinating with his friends from high school and college to create a guest list of people who hadn't all been in the same room for years. I organized the family's first annual Christmas cookie exchange, researching traditional recipes, and creating a rotation system so everyone could try multiple varieties without any one person being overwhelmed by baking demands. I coordinated Patricia's surprise retirement party from her job at the school district, managing RSVPs from colleagues spanning 3 decades of her career. Each event required weeks of preparation, countless phone calls and emails, spreadsheets, to track everything from dietary restrictions to seating arrangements. I became fluent in the logistics of large family gatherings, learning which rental companies had the best prices, which caterers could handle traditional Mexican dishes authentically, which photographers understood the importance of getting shots that included 3 generations. But somewhere in the middle of all this coordination and celebration, I lost track of my own needs and desires. My evenings were consumed with party planning. My weekends were spent shopping for decorations or setting up events. My vacation days were used for elaborate celebrations that left me more exhausted than a week at work would have. My savings account was constantly depleted by upfront costs for events that were theoretically being shared by the group, but somehow always ended up being my financial responsibility. When David and I started trying to get pregnant, I thought, maybe becoming a mother would shift these dynamics. Surely a pregnant woman wouldn't be expected to handle the physical demands of event planning. Surely the family would be more protective of my time and energy when I was growing their grandchild. Instead, the opposite happened. My pregnancy seemed to make me more available in their minds, not less. Because I was working reduced hours at my job, Patricia assumed I had unlimited free time. Because I was nesting and focused on home and family, she interpreted that as being more interested in domestic responsibilities. Because I was emotional and eager to please during those hormonal early months, I became even less likely to push back against unreasonable requests. The first major event after I announced my pregnancy was David's cousin Elena's quinceañera. Elena was the daughter of Robert's youngest brother, a shy 14-year-old who was excited about her upcoming celebration, but overwhelmed by the planning process. Patricia called me when I was 12 weeks pregnant, still dealing with mourning, sickness that lasted all day, and fatigue that made me feel like I was walking through thick fog. "Jess, I need to ask you about Elena's quinceañera," she began without preamble when I answered the phone during my lunch break at work. "Her mother is just not handling the planning well. You know how Rosa is. She's never been organized. And this is such an important milestone for Elena. The whole family is going to be there, and we want it to be really special." I set down my sandwich, my stomach already churning with a combination of pregnancy nausea and anticipatory stress. "What kind of help are you thinking about?" Well, you planned such beautiful events for our family. Elena specifically asked if you could help coordinate her party. She said Angela's shower was the most beautiful celebration she'd ever been to, and she wants something just like that, but for a quinceañera. The request sounded straightforward, but I'd learned enough about family event planning to know that helping coordinate meant taking full responsibility, while others offered opinions and critiques. A quinceañera is not a casual backyard barbecue. It's a formal celebration that rivals a wedding in terms of complexity, with traditional elements that need to be executed perfectly, a guest list that can easily reach over 100 people, and cultural significance that makes every detail feel critically important. Patricia, I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. A quinceañera is such an important cultural celebration, and I don't have experience with all the traditional elements. Maybe Rosa would prefer to work with someone who really understands the customs and significance. But Elena asked for you specifically. Patricia's voice carried that note of gentle manipulation that I was beginning to recognize. She said you made Angela feel like a princess at her shower, and she wants to feel that special too. Besides, Rosa can handle the cultural elements. She just needs help with the logistics, the coordination, all those organizational things you're so good at. The idea that Rosa would handle the cultural elements while I managed logistics sounded reasonable, like a genuine collaboration that would let me contribute my strengths while learning from someone with deeper cultural knowledge. I agreed to help, imagining weekly planning meetings where Rosa and I would work together to create something beautiful for Elena. What actually happened was that Rosa, overwhelmed by the scope of the celebration and grateful to have someone willing to take charge, essentially handed me a list of traditional elements that needed to be included and then disappeared from the planning process. The church ceremony needed to be coordinated with the priest, including rehearsals and specific music selections. The reception required a venue that could accommodate traditional Mexican dancing, a mariachi band, and a formal dinner for over 100 guests. Elena needed a dress that met both her teenage fashion preferences and her grandmother's traditional expectations. The chambelanes, the young men who would escort Elena in the traditional waltz, needed to be coordinated for rehearsals and fitted for matching formal wear. I spent my first trimester of pregnancy learning about quinceañera traditions I'd never heard of, researching vendors who specialized in formal Latin celebrations, and managing the complex logistics of an event that felt more like planning a royal wedding than a teenager's birthday party. My morning sickness was made worse by stress, and I found myself running to the bathroom to throw up after particularly overwhelming vendor phone calls or budget discussions that revealed how much money I'd committed to spending on someone else's daughter's party. Elena, sweet as she was, had the changing mind of a typical 14-year-old. The color scheme went from pink and gold to blue and silver to lavender and rose gold over the course of 2 months. The guest list expanded every week as she remembered friends from school, cousins from out of state, family friends she hadn't seen in years but wanted to invite. The menu changed from traditional Mexican dishes to fusion cuisine to a combination of both that required coordinating with multiple caterers. Through all of this, Patricia would check in periodically with encouragement and praise. Elena is so excited about her party. She tells everyone that her cousin Jess is planning the most beautiful quinceañera ever. You're making that little girl's dreams come true. But when I asked for help with specific tasks, she was always busy with her own commitments. When I presented budget numbers that were significantly higher than the original estimates, she'd remind me that Rosa was a single mother working 2 jobs and suggest maybe I could find more affordable alternatives. The quinceañera was held in late May, when I was 5 months pregnant, and showing enough that I had to buy a new dress specifically for the event. The celebration was beautiful, traditional, and flawless. Elena looked like a princess in her elaborate gown. The mariachi band was authentic and energetic. The food was delicious and abundant. The decorations were elegant and Instagram-worthy. The traditional waltz was perfectly choreographed and performed without a single misstep. Everyone complimented Rosa on what a beautiful celebration she had planned for her daughter. Elena's grandmother cried happy tears and told Rosa how proud she was that the family traditions were being honored so beautifully. The photographer captured stunning images of 3 generations of women celebrating this important milestone together. Rosa glowed with pride and gratitude, accepting compliments and congratulations for an event that had consumed my life for 3 months. I stood in the bathroom of the reception hall at the end of the night, my feet swollen in heels I could barely fit into anymore, looking at myself in the mirror and trying to understand why I felt so empty after creating something so beautiful. Elena had thanked me with genuine teenage enthusiasm, hugging me tight and telling me it was the most perfect day of her life. Rosa had pulled me aside to express her gratitude, saying she could never have created something so special without my help. But the help had become something closer to a takeover, and the gratitude felt disconnected from the reality of what I'd actually contributed. I had planned, coordinated, and largely funded an elaborate celebration for a family that wasn't quite my own, for a girl who was sweet but not particularly close to me because I was so good at handling other people's important moments, while my own pregnancy milestones went largely unnoticed. David found me in that bathroom, looking concerned. "Babe, are you okay? You've been quiet all night." I looked at my husband, this man I loved who had watched me exhaust myself for his extended family, without seeming to understand the cost. "I'm tired," I said, which was true but not complete. I was tired, but I was also becoming aware of a pattern that I didn't know how to break without seeming selfish or ungrateful. "The party was incredible," he said, putting his arms around me from behind and resting his hands on my growing belly. Elena looked so happy. Rosa was crying. She was so grateful for everything you did. "My family loves you so much, Jess. They're so lucky to have you." I leaned back against him, feeling our baby move as if responding to their father's voice. "I love them too," I said, and it was true. But love was starting to feel like a one-way transaction, and I was beginning to understand the difference between being loved and being useful. The pregnancy progressed, and so did the requests. Patricia asked me to coordinate a surprise anniversary party for Robert's parents, who were celebrating 50 years of marriage. Mike and Lisa needed help planning Emma's 7th birthday party, because Lisa had started a new job and was overwhelmed. Angela wanted advice on planning a gender reveal party for her sister who lived in California, which somehow became me coordinating a long-distance celebration via video calls and shipped decorations. Each request came with the same language of appreciation and family connection. Each event was successful and well-received. Each celebration left me more exhausted and less fulfilled, wondering when my own pregnancy journey would become something the family wanted to celebrate rather than something that made me more available to celebrate others. When I reached my 3rd trimester, Dr. Patel started warning me about the importance of rest and stress management. My blood pressure was elevated at several appointments, and she was concerned about the physical demands I was placing on myself. When she asked about my stress levels during one particularly difficult week when I was coordinating both a baby shower for one of Angela's friends and a retirement party for Patricia's coworker, I found myself crying in her office. "I just feel like I can't say no," I admitted, wiping my eyes with the tissues she handed me. "My husband's family depends on me to help with their celebrations, and I don't want to let them down. But I'm so tired, and everything feels overwhelming." Dr. Patel, a woman in her 40s who had 3 children of her own, looked at me with a mixture of compassion and concern. "Jess, you're growing a human being. That's a full-time job in itself. Your body needs rest, your mind needs peace, and your baby needs a mother who isn't constantly stressed and exhausted. What would happen if you said no to some of these requests?" It was a simple question that I couldn't answer because I'd never tried. What would happen if I said no? Would they be disappointed? Would they find someone else to help? Would they manage on their own? Would they stop seeing me as valuable to the family? The fear of finding out had kept me saying yes to everything, but the cost of that yes was becoming unsustainable. That night, I tried to talk to David about scaling back on family event planning until after the baby was born. He listened thoughtfully, as I explained how exhausted I was, how concerned my doctor had become, how overwhelmed I felt by the constant requests for help. "Maybe you could just do smaller things?" he suggested. Like, help with planning but not the actual setup and coordination on the day of events. But he didn't understand that there was no such thing as just planning when it came to family events. Planning was researching vendors, getting quotes, making deposits, coordinating schedules, following up on details, managing budgets, handling last-minute changes, and ultimately being responsible for everything working perfectly. The setup and coordination were actually the easiest parts, because by then all the decisions had been made and all the systems were in place. What if I just said no to new requests until after the baby comes? I asked. David looked uncomfortable. "I mean, you could do that, but my family really depends on your help with these things. They're not as organized as you are, and they want their celebrations to be special. Plus, Elena's quinceañera turned out so beautifully. I think they trust you to make their events perfect." There it was again. The language that made my exhaustion sound like ingratitude and my needs sound like selfishness. They depended on me. They trusted me. They wanted their celebrations to be special. All of these things were true, but they were also beside the point. I was 7 months pregnant, working a demanding job, and spending every spare moment coordinating other people's parties while my own nesting instincts and preparation needs were being ignored. That's when Patricia called about Robert's birthday. 3 weeks later, with a request that would finally push me past my breaking point. The conversation started the same way they always did, with appreciation and family connection, and gentle manipulation wrapped in the language of love and tradition. But this time was different, because this time I was too exhausted to say yes automatically, too overwhelmed to absorb another project, too aware of my own needs to pretend they didn't matter. This time, when she asked me to single-handedly cater a celebration for 20 people while 7 months pregnant, something inside me finally said no. Not out loud, not yet, but quietly, internally, definitively. No more. The morning of Robert's birthday party arrived with the kind of oppressive October heat that makes Phoenix feel like a furnace even at dawn. I'd been awake since 4:30. Not by choice, but because the baby had decided to use my ribs as a jungle gym. And once I was conscious, the anxiety about the day ahead made sleep impossible. My feet were already swollen before I even got out of bed, and the thought of spending the next 12 hours on them made me want to cry. David was still sleeping, his arm draped across my pillow, completely oblivious to the storm of stress that was consuming his wife. I envied his ability to sleep peacefully while I lay there cataloging everything that could go wrong with the elaborate feast I was supposed to single-handedly prepare for 20 people. The carnitas needed to start cooking by 6 a.m. if they were going to be tender enough by 3. The mole required constant attention and multiple tastings to get the spice levels right. The rice had to be timed perfectly so it wouldn't get mushy. The tres leches cake needed final assembly, and I still hadn't figured out how to keep it from falling apart when I tried to slice it. I eased myself out of bed, my body protesting every movement, and made my way to the kitchen. The ingredient list I'd taped to the refrigerator looked like a grocery store inventory. 4 pounds of pork shoulder for the carnitas, 3 different types of dried chilies for the mole, fresh masa for tortillas that I'd never made from scratch before, ingredients for sides and appetizers and desserts that would feed a small army. Looking at that list, written in my own handwriting, I felt a wave of panic that made my chest tight. This wasn't just cooking. This was catering a restaurant-quality meal for 20 people with dietary restrictions, cultural expectations, and family dynamics that would scrutinize every detail. And I was doing it alone, 7 months pregnant, in a kitchen that wasn't designed for commercial-level food preparation. The drive to Patricia's house in Scottsdale took 45 minutes in Saturday morning traffic. my car loaded with groceries and borrowed equipment that barely fit in my compact sedan. I'd had to make 2 trips to the store the day before because I kept forgetting items, my pregnancy brain making it impossible to keep track of the massive shopping list. The bill had been staggering, over $300 just for ingredients, not including the additional pots and pans I'd borrowed from neighbors, because Patricia's kitchen didn't have enough cookware for the scale of cooking I was attempting. Patricia's house looked serene in the early morning light, its desert landscaping and southwestern architecture giving no hint of the chaos that was about to unfold in its kitchen. I let myself in through the back door, as had become my custom, during event preparation, and began the process of transforming her domestic kitchen into something resembling a commercial operation. The first challenge was space. Patricia's kitchen, while beautiful and well-appointed for normal family cooking, was not designed for preparing a feast for 20 people. The counter space disappeared quickly once I started laying out ingredients. The refrigerator was already full of Patricia's regular groceries, leaving me to play Tetris with party ingredients that needed to stay cold. The single oven meant everything had to be carefully sequenced, and I'd already spent hours the night before creating a cooking timeline that accounted for different temperatures and cooking times. I started with the carnitas, seasoning the massive chunks of pork shoulder with a spice blend I'd researched online and practiced twice in my own kitchen. The meat barely fit in Patricia's largest slow cooker, and I found myself wondering if I should have cut it into smaller pieces or borrowed a second slow cooker from someone. But it was too late for second guessing. I set the temperature to low and hoped for the best. Next came the mole, the dish that had been keeping me awake at night with anxiety. Authentic mole poblano requires over 20 ingredients, including multiple types of chilies that need to be toasted, soaked, and blended in precise proportions. I'd watched YouTube videos and read blog posts and even called a Mexican restaurant in Tempe to ask for advice. But theoretical knowledge is very different from actual execution, especially when you're doing it at scale for people whose grandmothers made this sauce from memory. The chilies filled Patricia's kitchen with smoke as I toasted them in her cast iron skillet, the acrid smell making my pregnancy-sensitive nose water. I opened windows and turned on the exhaust fan, but the smoke seemed to cling to everything. My eyes were streaming by the time I got all the chilies properly toasted and transferred to bowls of hot water to rehydrate. While the chilies soaked, I started on the other components of the mole. Almonds and sesame seeds that needed to be toasted separately, onions and garlic that required careful browning, tomatoes and tomatillos that had to be charred and peeled, chocolate and spices that would tie everything together. Each component required individual attention, and I found myself running between multiple burners, trying to keep everything from burning while managing the complex timing of a sauce that I'd never made before. By 8 a.m., I was already behind schedule and covered in sweat. The October heat was building outside, and the kitchen was becoming stifling with all the burners running and the oven preheating for the next phase of cooking. My maternity top was sticking to my back, and my feet were beginning to ache in the supportive shoes I'd specifically chosen for this marathon cooking session. The baby was active, responding to my stress hormones and the heat by doing what felt like somersaults in my increasingly crowded abdomen. Every time I bent over to check something in the oven or reached up to get something from a high shelf, I felt the sharp pain of ligaments stretching and muscles protesting. My lower back was already sending warning signals that I was pushing too hard, but I couldn't stop. 20 people were expecting an elaborate meal in 7 hours, and I was the only person responsible for making it happen. Patricia appeared in the kitchen around 9, looking fresh and rested in a flowing white tunic and linen pants that somehow managed to look elegant even in the desert heat. She surveyed the chaos I'd created with what looked like mild alarm. Every surface was covered with ingredients, dirty bowls, or works in progress. The sink was full of dishes that I hadn't had time to wash. The smell of toasted chilies and browning meat filled the air. "Good morning, mija," she said, stepping carefully around the organized chaos. "You're certainly making yourself at home, in here." There was something in her tone that made me look up from the blender where I was pureeing the rehydrated chilies. Not disapproval exactly, but a kind of territorial awareness that I was taking up a lot of space in her domain. I suddenly felt self-conscious about the mess I'd created, the way I'd rearranged her kitchen to accommodate my cooking process. "I'm sorry about the chaos," I said, wiping my hands on the apron I'd tied around my expanded waist. "I know it's a lot of equipment and ingredients. I'll have everything cleaned up before people arrive." "Oh, don't worry about that," Patricia said, but she was still surveying the kitchen with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I just didn't realize quite how involved this meal was going to be. Maybe we should have kept it simpler." That comment hit me like a physical blow. After weeks of planning, shopping, and stressing about creating the elaborate traditional meal she'd requested, she was suggesting that maybe it was too much. But the time for simplicity had passed. I was already committed to a menu that would take all day to execute, with ingredients that cost more than some people spend on groceries in a month. "The mole is always time-intensive," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But it's what makes the meal special, traditional, authentic." Patricia moved to the stove where I was browning chicken pieces for the mole, lifting the lid and stirring with a wooden spoon. The oil splattered, and she quickly replaced the lid, but not before tasting the chicken and making a small face. "It needs more salt," she said, "and maybe some cumin. My mother always said the meat should be seasoned enough to taste good on its own." I felt my cheeks flush, partly from the heat of the kitchen and partly from embarrassment. I'd seasoned the chicken according to the recipe I'd researched, but apparently it wasn't right according to Patricia's family standards. I added more salt and cumin, tasting as I went, trying to adjust the seasoning to meet expectations I didn't fully understand. "Better," Patricia said, tasting again, "but still not quite right. The spice blend seems off somehow." Every comment felt like a small failure, a reminder that I was attempting something beyond my skill level for people whose standards I might never meet. I'd been cooking since dawn, and it wasn't even 10 a.m. yet. I had 8 more hours of preparation ahead of me, and already I was being critiqued for not meeting family expectations. "I could call my friend Rosa," Patricia offered as if she were being helpful. "She makes mole that tastes exactly like my grandmother's. Maybe she could come over and give you some guidance." The suggestion that I needed supervision from someone who actually knew how to cook Mexican food properly was mortifying. I'd spent weeks researching techniques and practicing recipes, trying to honor the traditions of a culture I was still learning about. The implication that I was failing, that I needed to be rescued by someone more qualified, made me want to disappear. "I think I can figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The sauce just needs more time to develop. Mole is supposed to be complex." Patricia shrugged, the gesture somehow conveying both doubt and resignation. "If you say so, mija. You're the one doing all this work." She left me alone in the kitchen, but her comments lingered like the smell of burnt chilies. Every stir of the mole felt like another opportunity to fail. Every taste was a reminder that I was attempting something I didn't fully understand for people whose approval felt increasingly impossible to earn. The morning progressed with a series of small disasters that accumulated like paper cuts. The masa for the tortillas was too dry, then too wet, then finally workable but producing tortillas that looked more like abstract art than the perfect circles I'd seen in restaurants. The Mexican rice burned on the bottom because I was distracted by the mole, which needed constant stirring to prevent it from sticking. The refried beans were too thick, then too thin, then finally acceptable, but nothing like the creamy perfection I'd been aiming for. By noon, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and increasingly panicked about the timeline. The carnitas were progressing, well in the slow cooker, filling the kitchen with the rich smell of perfectly seasoned pork. But everything else felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. The mole was dark and complex, but still didn't taste quite right to my uncertain palate. The sides were functional but not impressive. The tres leches cake was assembled but looked lopsided, and I was terrified it would collapse when I tried to serve it. My feet were screaming in pain, swollen so much that my supportive shoes felt like torture devices. My back was in constant spasm from standing and stirring and reaching. The baby was protesting the heat and stress with increasingly violent movements that made me nauseous and short of breath. I felt like I was drowning in the very celebration I was trying to create. That's when Patricia returned to the kitchen, this time with Robert in tow. He was dressed for his birthday party in a crisp button-down shirt and khakis, looking like a man ready to enjoy a celebration that someone else had planned and prepared. He surveyed the chaos of his kitchen with raised eyebrows. "Smells good in here," he said, but his tone suggested he was trying to be polite rather than genuinely impressed. "Patricia tells me you've been working hard all morning. Jess is making traditional mole," Patricia said, lifting the lid on the pot where my sauce was simmering. "Though I'm not sure it's quite ready yet." Robert moved to the stove and peered into the pot, his expression skeptical. "Looks pretty dark. My mother's mole was never that dark. Maybe too much chocolate?" I wanted to scream. I'd followed 3 different recipes, watched 5 YouTube videos, and tasted the sauce dozens of times trying to get it right. But according to the birthday boy and his wife, it was wrong. Too dark, too light, too thick, too thin, not enough salt, too much spice. Every element of the meal I was killing myself to prepare was being judged against the memories of women who'd been making these dishes for decades. "I can try to adjust it," I said, my voice barely steady. "Maybe add some broth to lighten the color or—" "Don't worry about it," Robert said, but his tone suggested he was resigned to disappointment rather than confident in my abilities. "I'm sure it'll be fine. People will eat it. People will eat it. Not, 'It smells delicious,' or 'Thank you for all your hard work,' or even, 'I'm sure it will be wonderful.' Just the bare minimum acknowledgement that the food I was preparing would be consumed by the guests, like I was providing sustenance rather than creating a celebration." Patricia opened the slow cooker where the carnitas were cooking and stirred the meat with a fork. "This looks better," she said, and I felt a tiny spark of hope. Though it might need more seasoning. The meat seems a little bland. She tasted a piece of the pork that I'd been seasoning and slow cooking for 6 hours, chewing thoughtfully. "Yes, definitely needs more flavor. Maybe some lime juice or more cumin. Something to give it some zip." I added lime juice and cumin, and salt and pepper, tasting and adjusting while Robert and Patricia watched like judges on a cooking show. Every suggestion felt like criticism, every adjustment like an admission of failure. I was 7 months pregnant, had been cooking for 8 hours straight, and was being micromanaged by people who hadn't lifted a finger to help but had plenty of opinions about the results. "Better?" Patricia said finally, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "I think it'll be acceptable." Acceptable. After 8 hours of work, after spending $300 on ingredients, after sacrificing my Saturday and probably my health to create this elaborate meal, the best I could hope for was acceptable. The guests started arriving at 2, an hour before the official party time, because apparently 3 o'clock meant different things to different people in the Martinez family. I was still frantically trying to finish the final preparations when the first wave of relatives descended on the kitchen, eager to help in ways that actually made everything more complicated. Angela appeared with her 3 children, who immediately began asking for snacks and drinks while I was trying to plate appetizers. Lisa arrived with Emma and Tyler, who started running through the kitchen while I was carrying hot pots from the stove to serving dishes. Margaret, Robert's sister, came bearing a store-bought dessert, just in case, as if she expected my tres leches cake to be inedible. Everyone wanted to taste everything, offering opinions and suggestions that came too late to implement. The mole was too spicy for some, not spicy enough for others. The carnitas were perfect, except maybe they needed more citrus or less salt, or different seasoning altogether. The rice was good, but not like Grandma used to make. The beans were acceptable, but seemed a little thick. Each comment was probably meant to be helpful, or at least conversational. But they felt like death by 1,000 cuts. I'd worked so hard to create something special, something that would honor the family's traditions and make Robert's birthday memorable. Instead, I felt like I was being graded on a test I hadn't been properly prepared for by judges whose standards I couldn't possibly meet. The final straw came when Patricia gathered everyone around the dining room table to see the spread I'd created. 20 people crowded around a table laden with traditional Mexican dishes, each one representing hours of work and research and hope. The carnitas glistened with their perfect, slow-cooked tenderness. The mole was rich and dark and complex. The sides were colorful and abundant. The tres leches cake sat at the center like a sweet finale to the feast. "Doesn't everything look beautiful?" Patricia said to the assembled family. "Jess worked so hard to make this meal special for Robert's birthday." But then she moved to the mole, lifting the serving spoon and examining the sauce more closely. Her face changed, taking on an expression of concern that made my stomach drop. "Oh," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "The mole doesn't look quite right, does it? The color is so dark, almost black. My grandmother's mole was never that dark." She dipped the spoon into the sauce and tasted it, her face scrunching up as if she'd bitten into something unpleasant. "It's very bitter," she announced to the room, "and the texture is grainy. I think maybe the chilies weren't prepared properly." The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd endured, after the weeks of planning and the day of exhausting preparation, she was publicly criticizing the centerpiece of the meal in front of 20 family members. Not quietly, not privately, not with any attempt to spare my feelings or acknowledge my effort. Just a casual, devastating critique that reduced hours of work to a failure in front of everyone who mattered to my husband. "My grandmother would be rolling in her grave seeing mole that looks like this," Patricia continued, apparently oblivious to the impact of her words. "Maybe next time you should ask someone who actually knows how to cook Mexican food to help you. This is just..." She trailed off, shaking her head as if the mole was too disappointing to even describe. The room was completely silent now, 20 people staring at the sauce that had consumed my entire morning, waiting to see how I would respond to this public humiliation. I stood there in my sweat-stained maternity top, my feet throbbing, my back screaming, my baby kicking in protest at the stress hormones flooding my system. I looked around the room at David's family. These people I'd been trying so hard to please. These relatives I'd exhausted myself to serve. And I realized that nothing I did would ever be good enough. Not because I wasn't capable, but because they didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me to serve them, to exhaust myself for their benefit, to be useful without being celebrated. They wanted the labor without the person, the service without the recognition, the sacrifice without the respect. That's when I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been building for months, but finally crystallized in that moment of public humiliation. It wasn't anger exactly, though anger was part of it. It wasn't hurt, though I was deeply wounded. It was clarity, sudden and complete, and liberating. I was done. Not just with this party, not just with this menu, but with the entire dynamic that had brought me to this moment. I was done killing myself to earn approval from people who were determined to withhold it. I was done sacrificing my health and happiness for celebrations that diminished rather than honored me. I was done being the family servant disguised as the helpful daughter-in-law. I pulled out my phone, my hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling through me. I Googled Catering Phoenix, Arizona, and found the first professional Mexican restaurant that offered same-day service. Sabor Auténtico Catering, run by Chef Isabella Rodriguez, specialized in authentic Mexican cuisine and had excellent reviews. "Excuse me," I said to the room, my voice cutting through the awkward silence that had followed Patricia's critique. "I need to make a phone call." I walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen and onto Patricia's back patio, where I dialed the number for professional help that I should have called weeks ago. When Chef Isabella answered, her voice warm and professional, I felt like I was calling a lifeline. "I need help," I said without preamble. "I'm 7 months pregnant. I've been cooking all day for 20 people, and it's not working. Can you save me?" "Mija," Isabella said, her voice immediately softening with understanding. "Tell me what you need." That phone call was the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect daughter-in-law and started being my own idea of a woman worth respecting. It was the moment I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to drown in other people's expectations and call for the help you deserve. Chef Isabella arrived at Patricia's house like an answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd been saying. Her catering van pulled into the driveway at exactly 2:15, just 45 minutes before the party was supposed to officially begin, though half the guests were already milling around the kitchen sampling my failed attempts at traditional Mexican cuisine. I watched through the front window as she and her assistant unloaded professional-grade warming trays, serving platters and insulated containers that promised salvation from the disaster my day had become. Isabella herself was exactly what I needed in that moment. Competent, calm, and completely unfazed by the chaos she was walking into. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a crisp white chef's coat embroidered with her restaurant logo. When she rang the doorbell, I practically ran to answer it, my swollen feet protesting every step, but my relief overwhelming any physical discomfort. "You must be Jessica," she said, giving me a quick but thorough assessment that took in my exhausted state, my stained apron, and my obvious pregnancy. "Don't worry, mija. I've seen worse kitchen emergencies than this, and I've never met a situation I couldn't fix." I led her through the house to the kitchen, where my morning's work was still scattered across every available surface, half finished. Dishes sat in various states of completion, the mole pot still simmering with its controversial dark sauce, tortillas cooling on towels, and the tres leches cake listing slightly to one side like a sinking ship. The smell of cooking hung heavy in the air, a mixture of success and near disaster that told the story of my morning better than words could. Isabella surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd built a career solving other people's culinary crises. She moved to the mole pot first, lifting the lid and stirring the sauce with a clean spoon. She tasted it thoughtfully, her expression neutral, then tasted it again with a small nod. "This is actually quite good," she said, looking surprised. "Complex flavor, good depth, nice heat level. Whoever told you this was wrong doesn't know what they're talking about." The validation hit me so hard I almost started crying right there, in Patricia's kitchen. After hours of criticism and second-guessing, having a professional chef tell me that my mole was actually good felt like being rescued from drowning. I'd been so conditioned to accept Patricia's judgment as authoritative that I'd started to doubt my own abilities, my own taste, my own worth as someone attempting to honor her family's traditions. "The color is darker than traditional," Isabella continued, "but that's because you used more chocolate, which actually improves the depth of flavor. Some families prefer it lighter, but there's no right or wrong way when it comes to mole. Every grandmother had her own recipe, her own techniques, her own preferences." She moved to the carnitas next, pulling apart a piece of the slow-cooked pork with 2 forks. The meat was perfectly tender, falling apart at the slightest pressure, with a beautiful caramelized exterior and juicy interior that looked exactly like what I'd been aiming for all morning. "This is restaurant quality," Isabella said firmly. "Whoever's been criticizing your cooking today has unrealistic expectations or is just being difficult. You've done excellent work here, especially considering you're 7 months pregnant and working in a home kitchen. Her assistant, a young man named Carlos who looked like he was probably in culinary school, was already setting up warming trays and organizing serving platters with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Within minutes, they'd transformed Patricia's dining room into something that looked like a professional catering setup, complete with chafing dishes, proper serving utensils, and elegant presentation that made my home-cooked meal look like it belonged in a high-end restaurant. "What I'm going to do," Isabella explained as she worked, "is supplement what you've already made with a few additional dishes that will round out the meal and make everything look more abundant. Your mole and carnitas are the stars of the show, but I'll add some fresh salsas, professional quality Mexican rice, and a few appetizers that will make the whole spread feel more complete." She worked with the kind of confident efficiency that comes from years of professional experience, her hands moving quickly and surely as she arranged food and adjusted seasonings. The rice she'd brought was fluffy and perfectly seasoned, each grain distinct and aromatic. The salsas were bright and fresh, with layers of flavor that complemented rather than competed with the dishes I'd prepared. The appetizers were elegant and beautifully presented, the kind of thing that makes guests feel like they're at a special occasion rather than just another family gathering. Within 30 minutes, the dining room table had been transformed from a collection of my amateur attempts into a professional feast that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything I'd made was still there, but now it was presented properly, supplemented strategically, and arranged in a way that showcased the best elements while downplaying any imperfections. "There," Isabella said, standing back to admire the, spread. "Now this looks like a proper celebration." Patricia appeared in the dining room just as Isabella was making final adjustments to the presentation. She stopped short when she saw the transformation, her eyes widening as she took in the professional setup, the additional dishes, the elevated presentation of everything I'd spent the morning preparing. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of confusion and something that might have been alarm. "I hired Chef Isabella to help finish the meal," I said calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She's made sure everything is perfect for Robert's birthday." Patricia's face went through a series of expressions as she processed what I'd just told her. Confusion gave way to shock, which shifted into something that looked almost like panic. "You hired a caterer? But you were supposed to be cooking. This was supposed to be your contribution to the family." "My contribution," I replied, "was making sure Robert had a beautiful birthday celebration with delicious food, which he now has." Before Patricia could respond, Robert himself appeared in the dining room, drawn by the commotion and probably curious about what was happening with his birthday meal. When he saw the transformed table, his entire demeanor changed. His eyes lit up as he took in the abundant spread, the professional presentation, the obvious care that had gone into every detail. "Wow," he said, moving closer to examine the food. "This looks incredible. Patricia, you really outdid yourself this time." Patricia shot me a look that was equal parts frustration and desperation. She was caught between taking credit for something she hadn't done and admitting that I'd hired professional help because her demands had been unreasonable. "Well, Jess arranged everything," she said stiffly, the words seeming to stick in her throat. Robert moved to the mole first, the dish that had been the source of so much criticism throughout the morning. He served himself a generous portion, tasting it with the kind of attention that suggested he was really evaluating the flavor rather than just being polite. "This is amazing," he said, his voice carrying genuine surprise and pleasure. "It tastes exactly like my mother's recipe. How did you get the flavor so complex? And this depth of chocolate? It's perfect." I glanced at Isabella, who gave me a small, knowing smile. The mole that Patricia had publicly criticized, that had been declared too dark and too bitter and wrong in every possible way, was actually delicious. Professional-level delicious, according to someone who cooked Mexican food for a living and had just served it to a man whose mother had made the same dish for decades. The other guests began filtering into the dining room as word spread that the food was ready. Everyone seemed impressed by the presentation, the abundance, the obvious care that had gone into creating such an elaborate spread. They filled their plates with enthusiasm, complimenting the flavors and the variety and the beautiful way everything was presented. Uncle Frank, who was diabetic and usually cautious about what he ate at family gatherings, sampled everything and declared it the best Mexican food he'd had since his grandmother passed away. Aunt Margaret, who usually found fault with everything, went back for seconds and asked for the recipe for the mole sauce. Even the kids, who were notoriously picky eaters, cleaned their plates and asked for more carnitas. But the most telling reaction came from David's cousins, particularly the women who had grown up eating their grandmother's traditional cooking and had strong opinions about authenticity and proper technique. They didn't just eat the food, they savored it, closing their eyes to fully appreciate the complex flavors and textures that I'd somehow managed to create, despite my inexperience and Patricia's constant criticism. "Jess, this is incredible," said Maria, Robert's niece who had recently graduated from culinary school and usually had strong opinions about Mexican food prepared by non-Mexican cooks. "The mole is sophisticated and complex, but not overwhelming. You really understand the balance of flavors that makes this dish special." Isabella, who had been quietly cleaning up in the kitchen while the family enjoyed the meal, appeared at my elbow with a knowing smile. "See, I told you your cooking was excellent. Sometimes the problem isn't the food, it's the critics." As the afternoon progressed and the initial rush of serving gave way to the relaxed socializing that marks a successful party, I found myself in an odd position. For the first time in months of family gatherings, I wasn't running around serving people, refilling drinks, clearing plates, or managing the logistics that kept everything running smoothly. Isabella and Carlos had handled the setup and presentation, and now they were quietly managing the cleanup and maintenance that usually fell to me. Instead of being the invisible facilitator who made everything possible, but never got to enjoy the results, I was actually able to sit down, put my feet up, and participate in the celebration as a guest, rather than as unpaid staff. It was a strange sensation, being present at a family gathering without feeling responsible for every detail of its success. David found me sitting on Patricia's back patio, my feet elevated on an extra chair, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He sat down beside me, his expression thoughtful and slightly troubled. "The food was incredible," he said. "Everyone's raving about it. Dad said it was the best birthday meal he's ever had." "I'm glad he enjoyed it," I replied, meaning it sincerely, despite everything that had led to this moment. "But Mom seems upset about something," David continued. "She keeps asking people if they know you hired a caterer, like she's trying to figure out how to explain it or something." I turned to look at my husband, this man I loved, who had watched me exhaust myself for his family's approval, without seeming to understand the cost. "David, I was 7 months pregnant, standing in your mother's kitchen for 8 hours, being criticized for every dish I made while trying to single-handedly cater a meal for 20 people. What exactly was I supposed to do?" "I know it was a lot of work," he said carefully. "But Mom was really looking forward to you cooking traditional food for Dad's birthday. She saw it as you embracing our culture, becoming part of the family traditions. By killing myself to meet impossible standards while being told everything I made was wrong," I asked. "That's not embracing culture, David. That's being hazed." He was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd said. "So what happens now? Mom's talking about the cost, asking who's going to pay for professional catering that nobody authorized." "I am," I said simply. "I authorized it, I paid for it, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with me directly." $1,200, Jess. That's a lot of money for one meal." "It's exactly what professional catering costs," I replied. "If your family wants restaurant-quality food for 20 people, they can pay restaurant prices. If they want home cooking, They can cook at home or ask for help in a reasonable way that doesn't involve one pregnant woman doing all the work while being criticized every step of the way. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of processing stress. I just don't understand why you didn't ask for help earlier. If you were feeling overwhelmed, you could have said something. I did say something, I reminded him, multiple times. I told you I was exhausted. I told you the menu was too ambitious. I told you I was worried about overexerting myself. Every time you said your family was counting on me, that they trusted me to make the celebration special. Because they do trust you, David said. They think you're amazing at this stuff. They think I'm useful, I corrected. There's a difference between being valued for who you are and being valued for what you can do for others. Your family doesn't want me, David. They want my labor. They want someone who will exhaust herself to make their celebrations perfect, while they take credit for the results. The conversation might have continued, but we were interrupted by Patricia herself, who appeared on the patio looking like a woman who had been struggling with a difficult decision and had finally reached a resolution. She was carrying a glass of wine and wore the kind of determined expression that suggested she'd been rehearsing what she was about to say. "Jess, I need to talk to you about this catering situation," she began without preamble. "I've been thinking about it all afternoon, and I just don't understand why you felt the need to hire professionals when you were supposed to be cooking for the family." I looked at my mother-in-law, this woman who had spent the morning criticizing every dish I made while I exhausted myself, trying to create something special for her husband's birthday. "Patricia, I hired help because I needed help. I was 7 months pregnant, cooking for 20 people, and being told that everything I made was wrong. It was either hire a professional or have a complete breakdown in your kitchen." "But that's not how family works," Patricia insisted. "When we ask you to contribute to celebrations, we're asking you to be part of the tradition, to show that you care about us enough to put in the effort. Hiring someone else to do the work defeats the whole purpose." "The purpose of what, exactly?" I asked. "Proving that I'm willing to sacrifice my health and sanity for your approval? Demonstrating that I'll exhaust myself trying to meet standards that change every time I get close to meeting them?" Patricia's face flushed, whether from the wine or from anger, I couldn't tell. "That's not fair, Jess. We've never asked you to sacrifice your health. We just wanted you to cook a nice meal for Robert's birthday." "A nice meal?" I repeated. "Patricia, you asked me to prepare an elaborate traditional Mexican feast for 20 people with multiple courses and dietary accommodations, using recipes I'd never made before, while 7 months pregnant. That's not a nice meal. That's a catering job. Other women in this family manage to cook for large gatherings. Without hiring professionals," Patricia shot back. "My mother fed 30 people every Sunday for 40 years without complaining about it being too much work." "Your mother wasn't 7 months pregnant and working a full-time job while learning to cook traditional dishes from YouTube videos," I replied. "And I'm willing to bet your mother wasn't criticized for every dish she made while she was making it." David shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly torn between supporting his wife and avoiding conflict with his mother. "Maybe we're all just tired," he said diplomatically. "It's been a long day." "I'm not tired," Patricia said firmly. "I'm concerned about what this means for our family dynamics going forward. If Jess is going to hire professionals every time we ask her to contribute to celebrations, then maybe we need to reconsider how we handle these things." "That sounds like an excellent idea," I said, surprising both of them with my ready agreement. "Let's absolutely reconsider how we handle these things. Because going forward, any event coordination I do will be treated as professional work, with professional rates and professional boundaries." Patricia stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "Professional rates? Jess, we're family. Family helps family without expecting payment." "Family helps family," I agreed. "But family also respects each other's limitations, appreciates each other's contributions, and doesn't exploit each other's willingness to serve. What's been happening isn't family helping family. It's one person doing all the work while everyone else takes credit for the results. "I think you're being overly sensitive," Patricia said, her voice taking on that condescending tone that suggested I was being emotional and unreasonable. "Nobody's trying to exploit you. We just recognize that you're good at organizing things and we appreciate your help. Then you can show that appreciation by treating my time and skills as valuable," I replied. "Event planning is work, Patricia. Real work that requires real skills and real effort. If you want me to coordinate future celebrations, you can pay my professional rates, just like you'd pay any other event planner." The silence that followed was deafening. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the desert landscape. Patricia looked like I'd just suggested something completely outrageous and possibly offensive. But I felt calmer than I had in months, finally articulating boundaries that I should have set long ago. "So what are you saying exactly?" Patricia asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "That you're going to charge us money to help with family celebrations?" "I'm saying that if you want professional-level event coordination, you can pay professional rates," I replied. "If you want family-style help, you can ask nicely, offer to share the work, and accept that the results might not be perfect. But what stops now is the expectation that I'll exhaust myself to create elaborate celebrations while being criticized every step of the way." Patricia stood up abruptly, her wine glass nearly slipping from her hand. "This is ridiculous, Jess. You've changed. This isn't the woman David married, and it's certainly not the daughter-in-law we welcomed into this family." "You're absolutely right," I said, feeling a surge of clarity that was almost liberating. The woman David married was willing to say yes to everything, to prioritize everyone else's comfort over her own well-being, to exhaust herself trying to earn approval that was never actually available. That woman was hurting herself and potentially hurting her baby, trying to be perfect for people who were determined to find fault no matter what she did. I stood up slowly, my pregnant body protesting the movement, but my spirit feeling lighter than it had in months. The woman I am now asks for help when she needs it, sets boundaries that protect her health and her family's well-being, and values herself enough to refuse treatment that diminishes her worth. If that's not the daughter-in-law you want, then we have a problem. Patricia stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Finally, she turned and walked back into the house without another word, leaving David and me alone on the patio as the desert evening settled around us. "Jesus, Jess," David said quietly. "You really laid it all out there." "I had to," I replied. "This dynamic has been building for 2 years, and it wasn't going to change unless I changed it. Your mother has been treating me like unpaid staff, while expecting me to be grateful for the opportunity to serve. That stops now." "So what happens next?" David asked, his voice carrying a mixture of concern and something that might have been admiration. "Next, your family learns that I'm not their default event coordinator," I said. "If they want my help with celebrations, they can ask respectfully, offer to share the work, and treat my contributions as valuable, or they can plan their own parties." 3 days later, the invoice arrived in Patricia and Robert's mailbox. I'd created it on professional letterhead, itemizing every expense from the birthday party with the kind of detail that left no room for argument about what professional catering actually costs, Chef Isabella's services, additional food costs, equipment rental, service fees. Total, $1,200. The attached note was brief and businesslike. "Thank you for allowing me to coordinate Robert's birthday celebration. The event was successful, and I'm pleased that everyone enjoyed the food and hospitality. Please find attached the invoice for professional catering services. Payment is due within 30 days. Patricia called within hours of receiving the invoice, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Jess, what is this bill? You cannot seriously expect us to pay for a caterer we didn't hire." You asked me to handle Robert's birthday dinner, I said calmly. I handled it. Professional catering is what it costs to handle it properly. But you were supposed to cook. That was the whole point. The point was giving Robert a memorable birthday celebration with delicious food that honored your family's traditions, I replied. Mission accomplished. Everyone had a wonderful time. The food was authentic and delicious, and Robert said it was the best birthday meal he'd ever had. This is blackmail, Patricia spluttered. You're holding us hostage with this ridiculous bill. I'm not holding anyone hostage, I said. I'm simply charging for professional services that I provided. Event coordination isn't free, Patricia. If you want someone to plan and execute elaborate celebrations, you pay for that service. We're not paying this, she said firmly. This is absolutely ridiculous, and we won't be extorted by our own daughter-in-law. That's your choice, I replied. But just so we're clear going forward, any future event coordination I handle will be billed at professional rates. My event planning services start at $75 per hour, not including expenses. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was cold and distant. You've really changed, Jess. This isn't the person we thought you were. You're right, I agreed easily. I'm not the person who says yes to everything regardless of the cost to herself. I'm not the person who accepts criticism and manipulation disguised as family love. I'm not the person who values other people's comfort more than her own well-being. If that's the person you wanted, then you were never interested in me as an individual anyway. Patricia hung up without saying goodbye. The check arrived 3 weeks later, exactly half the amount I'd invoiced. $600 with a note from Robert. Thank you for making my birthday special. The food was incredible, and everyone had a wonderful time. We appreciate everything you did to make the day memorable. It wasn't the full amount, but it was acknowledgement. More importantly, it was proof that boundaries work, that refusing to accept unacceptable treatment forces people to either change how they treat you or reveal who they really are. Christmas came 6 weeks later. I was 8.5 months pregnant by then, moving slowly and carefully, my body preparing for the arrival of our daughter. Patricia called in early December, her voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested she'd been practicing the conversation. We're planning Christmas dinner, she said without preamble. The usual crowd, probably 25 people this year. Would you like to contribute something? The question was phrased differently than it had been in the past. Not would you handle the cooking, or could you coordinate the meal, but would you like to contribute something? The language of choice rather than expectation, of voluntary participation rather than assigned responsibility. What were you thinking? I asked, genuinely curious about what she had in mind. Maybe some dinner rolls? She suggested tentatively. Store-bought is fine. Or if you're feeling up to it, maybe that delicious cornbread you made for Sunday dinner once. People have been asking about that recipe. Store-bought dinner rolls. After 2 years of expecting me to single-handedly cater elaborate family celebrations, she was asking me to pick up bread from the grocery store bakery. The shift was so dramatic it was almost comical, but it was also exactly what I needed to hear. I can handle dinner rolls, I said. That sounds perfect. Our daughter Sophia was born 3 weeks later, healthy and beautiful, with David's dark hair and my stubborn chin. When Patricia came to the hospital to meet her first grandchild, she brought flowers, a casserole, and something I hadn't expected, an apology. I've been thinking about everything that happened, she said quietly, holding Sophia while I recovered from the exhaustion of labor. About the birthday party and the way I handled things. I think maybe I was asking too much of you, especially while you were pregnant. It wasn't a complete apology, and it didn't address all the ways the family dynamic had been problematic. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that boundaries weren't personal attacks, that asking for reasonable treatment wasn't unreasonable. I just wanted you to feel like part of the family, Patricia continued. But I think I was confusing being part of the family with doing all the work for the family. I am part of the family, I said, looking down at my daughter, this perfect little person who would grow up understanding that love doesn't require martyrdom. But being part of a family means everyone contributes according to their abilities and circumstances. It doesn't mean one person exhausts herself to make everyone else's life easier. Patricia nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think I'm learning that. It might take me some time to get used to asking for help instead of expecting it, but I'm willing to try. 6 months later, when Lisa was planning Emma's 8th birthday party, Patricia suggested they hire a professional coordinator. It's worth the expense, she told Lisa matter-of-factly. Professional help makes such a difference, and it's not fair to expect one person to handle everything alone. I smiled when David told me about that conversation, bouncing Sophia on my lap while she grabbed at everything within reach with the determined curiosity of a baby discovering the world. The family was learning, slowly but surely, that my worth wasn't measured by my availability, that my love didn't require my exhaustion, that healthy relationships require reciprocity and respect. The chef's business card is still in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license like a reminder that help is available when I need it, that asking for support isn't weakness, but wisdom. Every time I see it, I remember the moment I chose to value myself enough to refuse impossible expectations, to protect my health and my baby's well-being over other people's convenience. And every time I look at Sophia, now a toddler with opinions and boundaries of her own, I'm grateful she's growing up with a mother who understands the difference between serving others and serving herself up as a sacrifice. Because the most important lesson I can teach her isn't how to make everyone around her happy at her own expense, but how to demand the respect she deserves while still being kind, generous, and loving. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is teaching them how to treat you properly. Sometimes love requires boundaries, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to exostulate yourself trying to earn approval from people who mistake your strength for their convenience. Because at the end of the day, you can't pour from an empty cup. And you can't love others well if you don't love yourself enough to insist on being treated with dignity and respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.